And we have a number of speakers here who are going to talk about the role that tech plays in the fight against hate in all of its forms around the world. And it is my great pleasure to present to you, to moderate this panel, Tom Thorley. Tom Thorley is with the GIFCT, and as you know, I think, GIFCT has been, from the beginning of the earliest days of the summit, one of the greatest friends of the summit and one of the greatest supporters and connectors of our work. So with profound thanks to Tom, I'm going to turn over this panel to him. Thanks.
Thank you, Laura. And thank you to everybody. Welcome. I just wanted to first say thank you to all of the previous panelists. I know that we've just had a range of different folks talking about different aspects of their experiences as survivors or as family members or as community members of folks that have been affected by the pervasive hate and violence that is impacting all of our communities. I personally have a real passion for making sure that their voices are included in our work at GIFCT and making sure that those perspectives really feed into the strategy of the work that we do at the Global Internet Forum to Counterterrorism. So really appreciate all of those panelists, and just wanted to say that our door here at GIFCT, and I'm sure I can speak for all of our panelists, is always open to you if you want to collaborate or if you want to talk and share those experiences with us. I'm Tom Thorley. I'm the Director of Technology at GIFCT, the Global Internet Forum to Counterterrorism. And we are a nonprofit with the mission of preventing terrorism and violent extremism from exploiting digital platforms. We're a little over 3 years old now as a nonprofit, but we've existed actually in different forms since about 2016. And we've been working all of that time with a range of different tech companies from around the world. We now have 26, I believe, tech companies that we work with as partners, all the way from the biggest companies, some of those folks that you see on the stage with us right now, down to some really tiny companies, such as an organization which many of you will know, I'm sure, called Just Paste It, who are a one-person tech company based in Poland. The range of those tech companies is really important because we need to be able to work across the whole of the tech sector, really to help bring that sector together and help collaboration across that sector so that we are really harnessing the creativity that exists in the tech sector to prevent violence, to prevent hate, and to prevent terrorism and violent extremism online. Just to give you some kind of introduction to who we have on the panel today, we have a range of different people from tech companies and from civil society. And I wanted to give you an overview of the different things that are going on in the tech sector and the collaboration that is happening between the tech sector, within the tech sector, but also with civil society and tech and also with government. With us today, we have Yfat from the World Jewish Congress. We have Dina Hussein from Meta, Val from TikTok, Hugh from Microsoft, Mike from Modulate, and Tal-Or from CyberWell. I'll let them all give themselves a proper, more fulsome introduction in a second. But I wanted to just give you the breadth of the panel so that you could see where we have big tech companies here. We have trust and safety vendors like Modulate, who are an increasingly important part of this ecosystem. And then obviously civil society partners working with them to help bring some of that subject matter expertise and collaboration. So without further ado, I want to move on and give our panelists as much time as possible to talk. So Yfat, maybe I can come to you first and ask you about the impact of online hate in the communities and in the communities that we're working with, that you're particularly working with and represent, and how you're working with tech companies to prevent and counter that hate.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I can't really see the room, so it's a little bit less intimidating this way. But I'm going to try and kind of bridge maybe part of the conversation we had earlier until now, hearing from victims, hearing from survivors, communities, to the world of tech and working with internet platforms, and give some examples of how we work as well with the tech companies to face the challenges of online hate and hate in general today, and also to educate people as much as possible. I'll start by saying two main things. One, that there has undoubtedly been a lot of progress in working. A few years ago, I think a panel like this wouldn't have been possible. And there's definitely been a lot of progress with the big companies, the big internet platforms, the big social media companies. But there's obviously a long way to go. There's a lot of challenges that persist, but a lot of challenges that we'll hear about a bit that are new and emerging technologies, and a lot of challenges because of the adaptation that the proponents of hate do all the time to the restrictions that are posed on them and to the challenges that they face when they're trying to spread hate on the internet and social media platforms. So there's kind of challenges that arise all the time, and it's just an everlasting game of like chasing after our next steps. And the other thing that I always say in the beginning is we're talking about online hate and hatred online, but this is hate that exists offline. It exists in the people, and exists in the people who are promoting hate and hate messages on the internet and on different platforms, and then it faces people on the other side. So it's not online hate in that sense. It has real life consequences, it's real life people, and it's really important to always remember that when we work, and that's what I do with communities that we engage with, always remembering the people on the other side. So with that, I'm going to say one of the most, maybe two big challenges that we see today, and one of them really when working with communities is that the best or almost the only way for somebody who's facing hate online, be it on an internet platform, on a social media platform, on gaming, whatever, is to report. And that's a very frustrating process for a lot of people. Most of the reporting at this point, especially with the development of a lot of AI and machine learning, most of the reporting actually comes back with this response, what is it? This is not we're sorry that this is probably not the response that you wanted, right? It's like, yeah, it's not the response that we wanted. And it's a very frustrating process. A lot of people don't have other avenues to go to. And also this feeling that our dealing with hate for a very long time has been kind of condensed into reporting. We need to report messages all the time. What other avenues do we have to engage with companies, to engage with this world of online hate? What can we do? And there needs to be a lot better connection with on-the-ground communities. It's a lot of what I do in my work is connecting the people on the ground with the companies, whether it's through contacts we have or through trainings and programs and consultations together that we do. But I also want to think about this in a different aspect, because we're also kind of been cornered into thinking about hate online in terms of like a piece of content, right? Is this piece of content, is this inciting to violence? Is this piece of content terrorism? And this is probably not the room I need to say this, but that's not how hate works so much. And online, we're kind of like looking at it in a very piecemeal view, but hate is a process. Hate starts not from somebody saying, I'm going to go kill all the Jews. We're probably too late if we've gotten to that point where somebody is saying that. It's probably a bit late in the process, and we probably need different kind of mechanisms and law enforcement to deal with it. We need to start this process much earlier and think about hate spreading online, not through this kind of legal sense of like, oh, are they inciting to violence, or is this post like really against our terms? But it's a process that starts with other kind of messaging, with gentle messaging, with gentle, with a movement into hatred and othering of people. And I think that's one thing that we really, we'll see some examples of that happening, but that's really where we should be going when dealing with online hate. And so that's part of what we're going to do and what we're working on. And then I'll just say one more challenge and then a couple of examples, and I think I'm right on time. Mm-hmm. But another challenge that I just want to raise quickly now, and we spoke about this a bit before between us, we tend to focus a lot on these big platforms, right? Those who are here on the table, when they are forthcoming and come to the conversation and are willing to engage in these conversations and changes, the big social media platforms, the big platforms, There are a lot of challenges that smaller platforms face. We need to incentivize them to deal with these issues a lot more. Somebody from one of the smaller services told me, I think 99% of their trust and safety work is spam, dealing with spam, right? They don't have the time, the ability, the incentives to work on hate speech on their platforms, even though they face these problems, and they're not necessarily small. So we need to look at other platforms, and we also need to look at the vast, the huge amount of platforms who don't even moderate their content and who are open, and how do we deal with platforms that, we know, and we've heard about today as well, have so much hatred spanning them, but are unwilling to do anything, and we basically abandon the discussion on those platforms, and we need to do more. So I'll give quickly, because I think some of my colleagues here will speak about some ideas for what they actually do. But we work, for example, with both Meta and TikTok, who are here, on redirecting people who search for specific terms to other resources that they can find off these platforms, which for me is pretty amazing that these big platforms are willing to take people off their platform. And it's resulted in tens of thousands of people a month actually coming to a website that the World Jewish Congress and UNESCO have together, educating about the Holocaust. So if you search on TikTok or on Facebook for Hitler or gas chambers, they will offer you the option of going and getting better resources. And that's a way to catch people at an early stage before they're already, before they're spreading Holocaust denial and genocide now on the platform, to actually say, okay, here, why don't you actually go to a different resource for that? And I think that's something that can be expanded beyond just the Holocaust, obviously, and beyond diseases, we heard about diseases, but also to kind of catch those early points where we need to educate people and kind of drive them away from hatred into other spaces, consulting, counseling, etc., other resources that can help them. And the other example, and I don't want to steal the funder from Inga today, though I don't know if that's possible to steal Inga's funder, but is really trying to see how we can use the power of tech, media, social media, to bring better education. We've partnered with Inga, Storyfile, Meta, and some other partners on this, and you'll hear about that more, so that enables me to stop pretty much on time.
That's wonderful, Yfat, thank you. Maybe, Dina, I can turn to you and talk a little bit about those collaborations and Meta's broader approach. Obviously, Meta have been kind of instrumental in setting up GIFCT and partners with us since the very beginning, and currently Neil Potts, your VP of Global Policy, is that right? Neil's title?
Trust and Safety.
Trust and Safety.
Global Trust and Safety Policy. It's a
is our chair this year. So can you talk about Meta's approach to dealing with this issue and how collaboration fits into that?
Sure, I'd be happy to, although I've heard tell that there is a clicker somewhere, and I'm not sure where it is. So I can start talking about all the work.
There you go.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. It's a great moderator. Starting off on a good note. First off, I want to, as always, because this is my third Eradicate Hate, and so the gratitude to Laura and the team and everybody that has put so much effort into bringing us together cannot be overstated. I was saying this to Laura before jumping on the panel. Every year, I'm joined by some of the foremost voices in this space, and it genuinely never ceases to amaze me, the immense amounts of genuine goodwill that we come into the room with, which is not always the case. I think Yfat and I were talking about this, and Tal-Or and I were discussing this earlier. You're not always in a constructive space, and Eradicate Hate all 3 years has always been that space, so I'm incredibly grateful to them for once again bringing us together. I'm going to start off by taking you through the ways in which we do this work at Meta, and I'll touch on the types of developments that Yfat highlighted are very much needed and how we're approaching that, and then mention some of the partnerships that we have and how those feed into the community work that we're doing. So at Meta, the way that we approach our policies for any of the abuse types really needs to be situated within a conversation around the scale of the type of content that we're seeing. So when I last checked, we had an average of 2.6 billion people using Facebook on a daily basis. And then on a monthly basis, that jumps up to 3 billion. And the reason that I want to highlight that number is this is the type of content, the level of scale of this type of content that we're talking about in terms of how we have to review and take action on it. A lot of the conversations we're having in the room discuss, oh, but I know that that is violating because it feels uncomfortable to read. And I completely hear that. But then we also need to scale that up. So understanding these numbers and situating it is really important. Another thing that's really important to flag is all of this content is global. The majority of our users are not in North America, nor in Canada. And so the types of languages we're engaging with are vast and varied. So I wanted to touch on the people that work on Meta. We've got hundreds of people just dedicated to terrorism. And I genuinely mean the hundreds, all of whom come from backgrounds like countering terrorism within law enforcement, within governments, within civil society, and prevention. We also have a wider, the number would be in the thousands, of trust and safety folks looking at child exploitation, inauthentic behavior. And Neil, as well as a lot of the team members in trust and safety, have really started to emphasize looking at the intersections of these spaces. So one of the things I really did want to highlight is we're here to talk about hate, but Yfat highlighted earlier, and I'm sure a lot of my colleagues will highlight, that this is not happening in a silo. And so when these policies are able to look across each other and partner and really understand what is the ecosystem and what is the life cycle of one of these pieces of content, it's a much better way to address it. And so we've got the people dedicated to doing this kind of work. So I wanted to talk through our policy language a little just for everybody to be on the same page around what we remove at Facebook. So we remove anything that praises the organizations that we deem to fall under our dangerous organizations and individuals list. We remove anything that supports them, and we remove anything that represents them. So what that actually means is, in terms of our policies, we're really getting at the myriad of different ways that folks may come at engaging with these kinds of organizations. And because I'm running out of time, and I'm going to try and get through it all, but before I jump forward, the praise, support, and representation bucket means that you're getting folks that are initially engaging and maybe slightly pointing out, oh, ISIS removes trash from the streets, to everything on the extreme end of saying, I am a member of ISIS or Al-Qaeda or whatnot. One of the things that I really wanted to highlight is in working on these policies, we've also seen some progress in the technology that we use. So you might be able to see on the screen that we use tools that are able to cover the tracking of terrorist content. So we're able to find this by partnering with some of the folks on the stage, some of the folks out there, GIFCT through the hash sharing database, and it allows us to then be able to remove images and videos off of our platform very early on because we are aware of it. We refer to it as banking, but we save it in our system, and we then are able to block it from being uploaded. And then we're now improving the classifiers that are working to find this content. So we use a lot of machine learning in order to, if you change the filter on something, if you add a logo onto it, these classifiers are able to learn. Another thing that we do as a result of so many expertise in-house is we refer to them as strategic network disruptions, but to make it very easy to comprehend, we fan out to identify clusters of abusive networks. So not only are we removing content at scale, we're also removing content through the identification of individuals that are causing behavior that we deem to be nefarious and that we think might be on the spectrum of either recruitment or financing or whatnot. We then pan out to the entirety of their network, find other violating assets, black it out all at once. And what that does is it sends a threefold message. It makes the abusive actor aware that we are aware that you're using the platform, you are not welcome. The other thing it does is it makes it very difficult for them to reconstitute, because one of the trends was you rely on your network to coordinate reintegrating on the platform. And so when you black it out in one swoop, you're able to block them from doing that very easily. And then for the nerdy folks who were either analysts or researchers beforehand, the really interesting thing for me is I can figure out how do they try and come back. If I do this all at once, if I tier it, if I do it at this point in time, if I do certain portions of if we black out certain portions of the globe versus others, it's a really interesting portion of it. And then we have spoken earlier about recidivism. We stop former people who have been formerly identified assets from recurring, and we share knowledge across the apps. So we don't just hold that information, we share it between ourselves and Instagram, and then we also partner with other platforms as well. I also wanted to touch on our partnerships very quickly because I know I'm running out of time, and I promised Tal I'd give her 1 minute. We understand that building a policy is great. Theoretically, I dropped out of a PhD many years ago, and so critical theory is something I'm very well versed in. But theoretically, it's great to have an excellent policy, but it's very difficult if you can't deploy it. And then when you are able to enforce and deploy it through the tools that I discussed, it's also very difficult to just stop once you've removed the content, because as Yfat highlighted, and I'm sure all of my colleagues will also address, just removing it from your platform doesn't remove it from existence. This hatred and the vitriolic content stems from something that's happening in the real world. And so part of the Dangerous Orgs and Individuals team is solely and wholly dedicated to partnerships. And my team is here so you can talk to them. David and Neil and others are very invested in making sure that the community is part of our conversation. And so partnering with communities like the Sakina Trust, who was on stage earlier, and multiple other community organizations in order to understand early on, because they are the first line of defense, what they're seeing and the trends that they're seeing is incredibly useful. The other way that we've partnered is Yfat very much beat me to it, but we have the Redirect program, which is deployed for Holocaust denial, but also in other situations. If you're searching for right-wing extremist content, we will redirect you to a partner that is authoritative. Because, and my former partner in crime, Aaron, who is now at GIFCT, used to always say, it's great for Facebook telling you not to be an extremist as like your parents telling you not to do drugs. It is important for the organizations and the platforms to very much highlight that this is not activity we want on our platforms, but you can't take away from authoritative voices really emphasizing this. And finally, and I know we've talked about data sharing before, research is incredibly important, whether it's in-house or partnering with academics and experts outside, many of whom are in the room now, and GNet and GIFCT are part of that partnership as well. So that was an overview, and I'm happy to go into a little bit more detail about any specific aspects in the Q&A, but I did want to highlight that we are moving from a place where we are simply addressing content to moving to a world where we're looking at content and the behaviors that encompass them. And that's not coincidental, because while we are evolving our tactics, the adversary is also mutating. So our evolution needs to meet with that mutation in an equilibrium, or hopefully advance beyond it. And so looking at the behaviors that Yfat highlighted and building that into either our policies, which many of my team members are doing now, our scaled enforcement tools, and our partnerships is core to continuing to address the whole of ecosystem for us. That's it on my side.
Thank you, Dina. Val, obviously you have a lot of the same challenges at TikTok, but also being a much younger platform, a kind of rapidly growing platform, you've got some unique challenges as well. I wonder if you can touch on what those unique challenges are and how you're trying to address those through work on this topic.
Thanks very much, Tom, and let me just say thanks to the wonderful Laura Ellsworth and the organizers for this great event and for the opportunity to be here. About 20 years ago, I had the opportunity to work for a short time at the prosecutor's office for the criminal tribunal that was set up for the Rwandan genocide. And part of the evidence that we worked with were the broadcasts from a local radio station that was devoted to inciting hatred towards the Tutsi minority in the months leading up to the genocide. And in just 9 months of operation, this radio station was able to incite ethnic animosity and cultivate broad-based support for the eventual slaughter of 800,000 people in 100 days. So Yfat, your comments about process really resonated, because I remember the process of reading those transcripts about how they used that radio station to just relentlessly pump that information into the populace and build that hatred. And I was presented with this grim lesson about the power of words, that the persistent dehumanization of people that opens the door to just really violently deny their humanity. And I think that's something that powerfully motivates everybody at TikTok and on this stage and at this conference to try to find solutions to hate, because left unchecked, we are deeply cognizant. I think everybody in this room is deeply cognizant of the real-world consequences and the horrific consequences that can come as a result of that. We think at TikTok, we think about the power of words every day, how they have the power to humanize or dehumanize people, or to help them feel secure or protected or persecuted. And I think what we try to do and what we've done is, I think, not dissimilar from what Meta's done, which is to build a framework around how to protect our community. And that starts with our community principles, which are rooted in our commitment to human rights and are informed by various international legal instruments, and extends to our community guidelines, which state very clearly that hate and violence have absolutely no place on our platform. But it's not enough, I think, as we just heard, to tell people don't hate. I think we have a responsibility to help our community understand a little bit more what that means. So earlier this year, we updated our community guidelines to be more clear about how we define different types of harm, including hate. So we've long explained hate as an attack on an individual or group based on protected attributes. And now we give our community more specific guidance on what we mean by that. For example, misgendering, or denying Holocaust, or hateful slurs. The idea is to be more transparent about what exactly our approach is. At the same time, in our guidelines, we make allowances for members of a group with protected attributes to reclaim a slur, or for people referencing hateful language in educational contexts to be able to raise awareness against hate. So through the strength of these policies, in the first quarter of this year, we were able to remove 90% of hateful content proactively before it was even reported to us. And 75% of that was removed without any views at all. So what I'm describing, I think, is really at the core of what most responsible platforms are doing and how they're responding to this, with a rule adoption and enforcement model, which probably resonates with those of you from the criminal justice backgrounds. But at TikTok, we also want to try to be a bit more ambitious in how we approach this, using a more comprehensive and proactive approach, something that might resonate with those of you from more of a public health background. And that includes what we heard about earlier, potentially redirecting potentially harmful behavior to education, or empowering our community to stamp out hate together. And you heard one example from Yfat and from Dina about redirection. We have a redirection program that allows us to direct people to information about the Holocaust or about the Jewish community or anti-Semitism. But we also use convening moments that bring together large sections of our community and our society as an opportunity to remind people of the power of collectively standing up against hate. For example, in 2021, as part of our sponsorship of the men's Euro 2021 or 2020 soccer tournament, we launched our #SwipeOutHate campaign, which encouraged our community to stand together against hate. And I would like to kindly ask the organizers if they could cue a short video to give you an example of what I'm talking about. When we launched this campaign, this was the first video that people saw when they opened the app in those regions. And since then, we've continued to build on it with more videos for global events like the Women's Euro Soccer Tournament for 2022, this year's Six Nations Rugby Championship. And to date, these videos have been viewed over 250 million times. So I think part of what we're trying to do here is for our community to feel empowered, to be in control of their TikTok experience through tools that we might have in-app, like reporting content or accounts that shouldn't be on TikTok, or choosing who gets to engage with your content. But we also want to change the narrative. I started my remarks by talking about an example where words were fostering hate. But we also wholeheartedly believe in the concept that words and symbols and images and videos can cultivate connection and empathy and understanding. And that's the idea behind this more comprehensive and holistic approach that I've been talking about, which brings me in conclusion to everybody here in this room. My team and I are responsible for working with experts, NGOs, academics, and creators who have a deep understanding of how different communities experience the online world and how we can help them feel included and protected. And we take that knowledge, those inputs into our policies, our features, our products, our education and empowerment initiatives to foster a safer online experience. And in that sense, we aim not only for an inclusive experience, but an inclusive process in how we approach safety. So I just wanted to conclude by thanking all of you, incredible experts, academics, survivors who I heard just earlier, amazing inputs for your commitment, your passion, your dedication to this issue. We couldn't ask for anything more in terms of this joint mission to try to eradicate hate online. So thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Val. Hugh, just trying to drill down a little bit more, we've heard Dina and Val talk about the kind of macro approach that they take with some really good examples, but the online ecosystem is evolving rapidly, and two areas that I know Microsoft are very plugged into are gaming and generative AI. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your approach in those kind of areas, in particular when it comes to improving user safety with in gaming and using that generative AI, and any risks that are that you see in that space as well.
Absolutely. Just echoing what Val and others said, thanks to Laura and all the organizers of this conference and to you all for being here. It's truly quite an epic undertaking. I appreciate the opportunity here. I think there's a great deal of understandable concern around the development of AI systems. Today I kind of want to try to sound a note of optimism, if I can, because the opportunities that AI poses are truly transformational. It's difficult to think of a problem or a challenge that we face as a society, as a world, that AI can't contribute to resolving. So it's just untold potential for AI to contribute, and that extends to the digital safety space. We see in AI, an opportunity for a leap forward in our ability to predict and mitigate risk. Just the ability to do what we're doing right now, but in a global and nuanced way, kind of at scale, while remaining very committed to fundamental rights and free expression. And while maintaining differentiation across products and services in a really risk proportionate way. This, to us, is a huge part of the answer. And of course, there are new risks and there are new problems, but we do believe that AI will be critical to addressing those risks. And so there are a number of things that, I guess more specifically, platforms can do to promote fairness, safety, and trustworthiness in AI-based systems. And that can start at the model level. You can incorporate safeguards against adversarial inputs, and redirect users who try to abuse AI systems. You can incorporate meta prompts or sort of instructions to the model that help guide its behavior that are very kind of transparent and cognizant of safety risks, in making sure that human oversight is kind of central to the deployment of those systems, and that there's human review at multiple nodes along the way. Red teaming early and often, it's just sort of, very thoughtfully, intentionally looking for ways, anticipating ways that systems can be abused. Engaging with communities that have a stake in these systems or could be affected negatively by their deployment. Making sure that we're hearing all voices that need to be heard. Partnering with organizations that hold data that can be used to train or fine-tune the systems as they're going in order to improve their effectiveness. So those are some just, again, very general ways to make sure that these systems are safe and that they're deployed ethically. Specifically, content detection is an obvious way that AI can contribute to digital safety. Right now, we're rolling out an Azure-based AI content safety system to enterprise customers that can detect potentially harmful content, including hateful or violent content. Interventions and counter messaging, another specific area where digital safety can benefit from AI systems. Content provenance, one of the risks that we see is in, sort of hyper-realistic manipulated media, and that can manifest in a number of different ways. But ensuring that sort of watermarks or other metadata can be incorporated into generative AI-related imagery or video in order to improve, user literacy and enable the identification of that kind of synthetic media. Those are just a few sort of, specific applications of AI in the digital safety space. Happy to elaborate on any of that. But I know you wanted me to talk about gaming, which is another area where I think there's been a lot of focus, regarding hateful or violent extremist access to gaming platforms. And I think I want to echo some of what others have said here. Yfat, mentioned that if we're at the point where we're just in reactive mode and we're just talking about individual bits of content, we're kind of failing. And I think that Microsoft's gaming platforms are very cognizant of that. Their approach is very multifaceted. It's organized around 4 pillars: culture, collaboration, content moderation, platform architecture. And culture is something I really want to emphasize. It is an underappreciated but very critical driver of digital safety. And I sort of think about it as, if the platform were the garden, culture is the equivalent of making sure that that garden has enough water, light, that you're adding compost. So that it's creating all those conditions to ensure that values like community, respect, and fun in the gaming space can really thrive. And so there are a number of ways to foster that kind of culture, intentionally and concretely. And I'm happy to go into a few of those, things like a digital civility challenge, or using our Xbox Ambassadors program to sort of, as listening posts to sort of receive and transmit information to gaming communities and things like that. But I do think that the emphasis on culture is important. And then when you're getting to content moderation, you're talking about weeding the garden. You're talking about, ensuring that, to the extent there is harmful activity or content, that you have, a multi-pronged, multimodal system for identifying that, again, in a responsible way. And so, pairing those two major kind of efforts is very important, along with collaboration. And, we could go on here, and our work with the Global Internet Forum to Counterterrorism is critical to that, along with the Christchurch Call, organizations like the Institute for Strategic Dialogue. That kind of collaboration is a huge force multiplier. It enables us to get the information we need, to get the feedback that we need, and to make sure that we're hearing from individual communities and experts. So I'm happy to elaborate on any of that, but that's a very high-level overview of those two.
Thank you, Hugh. And I think that's a really nice segue, actually, into Mike. Mike, at Modulate, I know that this is your wheelhouse, right? The intersection of AI and gaming, and in particular, I think your unique, without stealing your thunder, your unique selling point is really around moderating of audio content, real-time audio content, which is, to my mind, one of the hardest challenges that we have to deal with. It's a really time-consuming, costly effort, and also very, very impactful when it comes to developing trust between people, developing that culture that Hugh was talking about. So can you talk to me about how Modulate approach that moderation challenge, and as well, just touching on how you are thinking about the rights of the users, the human rights of the users, and of any impacted communities as you're going through that process of moderating that content?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. And I'll add my gratitude to the pile with everyone else's, to Laura and everyone who's helped organize this amazing event. It's really an honor to be here. So as Tom mentioned, Modulate does voice moderation for online games. I want to talk, before getting into some of the specifics about that voice moderation, a little bit more about games in general. I find that games often these days still kind of get overlooked as, a hobby over in the corner, not something all that important. And I think it really is important to understand the impact that these games can have on the lives of many, many people. The first piece of that is understanding that in many of these games, the purpose of logging in is to participate in a competition amongst a team. And there has been study after psychological study that show simply being part of a team, simply having a team name or a team color, instantly bonds people. It instantly creates these powerful connections between people. Now, the audience that's here, I'm sure you can easily imagine the ways that that can be used maliciously, that someone recruiting for a hate group could leverage that kind of connection. But it's also a really, really important positive thing that impacts so many different people in different ways. I'm sure many of you had the experience over the pandemic of needing to stay connected with loved ones that you weren't able to see in person. And so many people turned specifically to games as the way to keep those connections alive. We also see even the communities that are often, most targeted by some of these kinds of hate speech and hate acts, finding real incredibly important value in these online gaming ecosystems. One example is the Trevor Project did an amazing study on LGBTQ+ youth during the pandemic and found, unfortunately not to anyone's surprise, almost every mental health metric for that demographic got substantially worse during the pandemic, except for one sub-cohort. The teens that had access to online games, and in particular, MMOs, which are a kind of game where you can create your character and really infuse your identity into the character that you're playing as. The teens that had access to a community in those spaces had substantially better mental health outcomes than everyone else. And that really ties back into the importance of being able to have a place where you can really share your identity with people and build these tight connections. So games really are an important place. It's a place that a lot of rich emotional connection happens, which is, again, really valuable, but it also makes it dangerous. It also makes it an opportunity for someone to come in and break those bonds in a way that resonates incredibly loudly and poignantly for a lot of people. On top of that, within games, because we are typically talking about, again, teams coordinating with each other, we're dealing with ephemeral, real-time content. And this starts to get into the voice chat piece in particular. When you're posting on social media, you're typically, in a certain sense, creating a poster board. It's going to be there for a while and be seen by many, many people. And if it gets posted 3 seconds after you tried to post it, there's not a ton of negative impact on the user experience from that. In a game, if you try and say, look out over there, and it doesn't go through for 3 seconds, it's all over. That was completely sort of ruining the experience. So there's a need in games to be able to process things much faster, while also respecting the fact that voice and text content in games are typically, again, ephemeral. There's this assumption of users of privacy when they're creating that kind of content. And so moderating that content, as we do at Modulate, requires a really careful balance between the need to detect, toxic, hateful acts and the need to respect that user privacy and make sure that we're not diving deeper into anyone's content or anyone's profile than the absolute minimum we need to protect that ecosystem. The analogy that I use to talk through how Modulate solves that problem is the image of taking your kid to the playground. Most people, when they bring their kid to the playground, do not loom behind their child the entire time, watching and listening to every single thing they do. Instead, you might be over on the sidewalk, chatting with the other parents, but watching out of the corner of your eye, just enough to see there's a strange adult walking up to my kid, or there's other kids that are pointing and laughing. Something is going wrong. That is my cue to take a closer look, get a better understanding of what's going on, not take any definitive action until I have the whole picture, but to use that kind of iterative investigation process to strike that balance between the safety of the child and giving them that autonomy and space to explore. That's the lesson that we try to deploy when we're using our technology in these online games, to start with early indicators and progressively zoom in more and more as we get increasing evidence that something is going wrong. That's one of the really important trade-offs that I think is critical to balance when using any technical systems, but especially AI, around that safety and privacy. The other one that I wanted to touch on briefly is the balance between AI and humans. I'm a founder of an AI tech startup, and let me tell you very emphatically, please don't just trust an AI to moderate your content. It's a bad idea. It's not the right way to use this technology. Any more than you would hire someone and say, hey, you're in charge of trust and safety, and we're never going to do a performance review, we're never going to do an evaluation, good luck, you're entirely on your own. It's not how work actually gets done. It's not how you ensure quality. So the way that we think about AI is as a tool to augment moderation and trust and safety teams, which frankly are all too often under-resourced, and give them the ability to punch above their weight class, give them the ability to hone in on the most harmful, the most hateful interactions that most desperately require someone's attention as quickly as possible, so that they can be using those limited resources they have in the most poignant way to really protect those online ecosystems. So much more to talk about, but I think that's a good place to pause for that.
Thank you, Mike. That's really helpful. Tal-Or, at CyberWell, I know that you are really trying to harness the collaboration that I think everybody has already touched on, but also harnessing technology in your nonprofit to support that effort. So can you just talk a little bit about how, as a nonprofit, you're working back into this space and really trying to address this with the tech company?
Sure, 100%. I just want to start off by saying that I'm the founder of CyberWell. The content that we see is pretty wild, but it's called CyberWell. I also want to start off by acknowledging the victims of hate that came before this panel. For me personally, this is a very full circle moment. The tragedy of the Tree of Life shooting is actually what inspired me to leave law and apply my skills in the field of open source intelligence, where I specialize in extremism in the United States and online anti-Semitism. And I think, like so many of you in the crowd, when Tree of Life happened, I was very struck with the sense that I never want something like this to happen again. And to me, it was very clear that the social media platforms and the tech industry was the key to making sure that that never happened again. So that's why I launched CyberWell. We are a tech-based nonprofit, and I'll go into more of what we do and how we work with platforms in big tech in order to make data about this minority community, about the Jewish community, more accessible and empower teams to more effectively remove this hate content from their platforms. And we hope that by presenting this model today here at the summit, that other nonprofits representing minority communities can take some key takeaways about the importance of knowing about the digital policies at these platforms, the structure of trust and safety teams, and the processes as a real avenue to move this issue of removing this hate content forward. So just a word about CyberWell because nobody knows who we are. We're a startup nonprofit designed to enforce and drive the improvement of community standards and hate speech policies and empower efforts against anti-Semitism and hate with the data that we collect. In May of 2022, we launched the first ever open database that was dedicated to monitoring online anti-Semitism across the 5 major social media platforms in English and in Arabic. We use AI technology, a lexicon that I developed over several years. To date, we've flagged roughly 200,000 pieces of anti-Semitic content or highly likely to be anti-Semitic content that we then go in and we professionally vet. So to date, in our short life, we've professionally vetted and reported over 4,500 pieces of anti-Semitic content. And I think what's unique about the way that we make those reports is that we actually not only monitor this content from an anti-Semitism perspective, but we give the platforms the data about which specific policy is being violated. Okay, so it's coming at it from a compliance perspective, it's coming at it from a data perspective, and kind of the same mutual reference point that most of these trust and safety teams have. It allows us to have a more productive conversation. So I'm very honored, I want to say, to be on the stage with the platforms and the tech companies that are taking active steps to work with trusted partners, with the nonprofits and civil society. I think for all of those here that care deeply about the role that technology plays in the hate sphere, we should notice which platforms are not here with us today. It sends a message, it's very concerning, and actually these platforms are the ones that we need to be focused on uplifting and working with to make real dents in this ecosystem. So what we're going to share with you today is the model of an intimate working group that was created thanks to Laura, who is the firecracker of this event, as we all know, and introduced us to TikTok ahead of this Eradicate Hate Summit, where we were able to work intensely together over the course of 3 months and create 3 high-level compliance alerts that were looking at different trends of anti-Semitism on TikTok. At the end of this process, we were able to jointly remove over 200 videos, and CyberWell was subsequently onboarded as a trusted flagger. And I'm going to go into the narratives and the anti-Semitic content because, unfortunately, these are trends that are on other social media platforms, so I think they bear repeating. And we're going to go into the success and the model of one specific campaign. So we started off by looking at this kind of relatively large scope trope that doesn't have a lot of behavioral indicators. The idea that Jews control the media, which gained a lot of new life on social media platforms after the attacks by Kanye West on the Jewish community online. We also looked at a new trend using the number 6 million and food as a way to promote Holocaust denial and distortion. And we also went into a very specific campaign, which we find to be the more specific, the more effective this partnership was, a modern twist on a blood libel, a deep fake interview with a Rabbi Finkelstein claiming that Jews murder infants, use their bloods for ritual sacrifice, and then sell the bodies to McDonald's for hamburger meat. So before you lose hope or your lunch, we'll go into the wonderful successes of actually working together with TikTok. But before we do, we want to take a moment to explain something which I don't think is transparent to all of you here who care so much about hate and how this actually works on the platform side. So in a trust and safety team, what happens, we talk about reporting hate and how do we move beyond that process. So what actually for most trust and safety teams are the process? So first they have review and remove, right? So they'd get a report from a user, or they'd get a report from a nonprofit. Then they could go into their own systems internally, see if that's a wider prevalent trend, okay? And finally, if they have the ability to tease out those specific data points or elements that could actually be used for automatic or systemic prevention, meaning automatic flagging, blocking, or de-amplifying. But there's a problem. Okay, most user reports get stuck at the review and remove level, especially when we think about minority communities. Jews, for example, make up less than 1% of the worldwide population. And these are worldwide platforms. So you can imagine that if they're sending in their reports, as Yfat said, and they're getting these automated responses of, sorry, we can't remove that, a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's simply getting lost in the shuffle. So we move into trusted partnerships with nonprofits. We think, great, that's the solution. But here too, most of the reports get stuck at the review and remove part of this process. It's because they're sending disparate lists. It's because the interactions are kind of touch and go. Occasionally there's links, sometimes there's not links, okay? And moreover, it's just transactional. It's just, here are the links, remove them. So what we want to show you is what we did with TikTok leading up to the Eradicate Hate Summit, and why we think this is a model that could be very useful for other nonprofits representing other minority groups going forward. So if we look at the Finkelstein campaign that I highlighted for you guys, let's talk about that process. So we started off working with TikTok. We flagged an initial 14 videos that included this anti-Semitic campaign, reached about 1.4 million views. And then we were also able to highlight the specific hashtags, the accounts, the audio clip that enabled the team to go in independently and remove up to 60 videos. So now we've passed probably the 2 million mark. And moreover, because we were working together, because we were very clear on the way that the trusted trust and safety teams worked internally at TikTok, because that transparency existed, we were able to identify what was the common denominator in this anti-Semitic campaign, which was a specific audio clip that now is automatically flagged for human review. So you've actually went from X amount of views to preventing an infinite amount of views. And that's a model of how you can take a tech-based nonprofit with the passion and the knowledge of a specific form of hate that's affecting their community and actually leverage that to affect the entire process and remove this hate at scale. So I just want to share why this worked, because I think that it's important to say what really brought this to the form of synergy beyond partnership, okay? So first of all, there was a mutual trust there. We were introduced by a vetted colleague, Laura the Firecracker. She said, you got to work together, it's going to be great. But we also made it very apparent that we were trustworthy. We signed an NDA, nothing went to press without coordination. I think that this is something that's important for nonprofits to hear if they see, as I do, that the technology ecosystem is where we need to be focusing our efforts. We're speaking the same language. We have a deep understanding about the policies. We have a deep understanding about the data points that these teams need in order to remove this content at scale. We're very clear on what it is that we're actually trying to remove in the moment, okay? We get into why it's a wider trope and things that the community goes through, but at the end of the day, we're trying to get work done, so we're very clear. We communicated very regularly. We were on 9 calls together over the course of 3 months. It can't be a once a quarter call if you're actually trying to make a dent in these platforms. And we also committed to deliverables. We outlined together our scope of work, and there was mutual feedback on those same deliverables. So that's it for the presentation. And I just want to say that I really think that we should think about this as content moderation today, okay? And when we want to think about effective content moderation for generative AI and bringing that expertise that nonprofits have and that minority communities have of the hate that they experience, you want to have this kind of mutual point of reference. You have to understand that these policies are in place. There are avenues to create influence, and I think that that's a call for me personally to nonprofits and also to the philanthropic space to understand that this is how we should be working.
Thank you so much. I think we're running short on time, but Laura isn't quite hooking me off the stage yet. So I'm going to ask just one question of you all. We already touched a lot on collaboration. We've touched lightly on the kind of human rights aspects, and there's a huge amount more we could say in that space. But what I would really like, as this is a very action-orientated summit, is to ask you each about the impact of this work. And if we're coming back here in 12 months' time and sitting here again and having this panel, how would you each think, how would you each judge that we've been doing a good job? We've been successful in our aims as a group here. Yfat, maybe I can start at this end and we can kind of go quickly down. What would you wish for in 12 months' time if we were to come back and reconvene?
Oh, no time to think about it. So I think what really has come out from everything is thinking about, I loved the notion of culture and how do we change the culture online, and seeing that we have, we put more emphasis on changing the culture and using different tools, working with the communities as the change makers on all these platforms, as people who can go and work on the platforms. I think that's one thing of looking at this in the broader scope, and we'll talk about the different projects that we all do in that space, and that would be great. And also one more thing is just the cooperation. I know GIFCT, actually, you could probably speak about this more, but looking at how different platforms can cooperate with the communities and help new and other platforms bring them into this realm, bring them into this conversation, and help them really elevate their ability to eradicate hate from their platforms too.
Thank you. Dina.
Sure. I think the way that I will approach it is with the rule of three, just because, it's the end of the day. I'd say there's three levers. It's exchange, enforce, and evolve. Within exchange, it's exactly what Yfat was highlighting in terms of continuing to have this dialogue. You've already seen each and every single person on this panel has highlighted a moment when, to use Tal's example, a trusted partner in some sort of way brought two groups together and said, these folks are intending to get to the same goal. Let's ensure that we're working and collaborating. And I can guarantee you, the three platforms here have very robust engagement teams, but you also have met all of us. We've met you over coffee, you have our business cards. There is a genuine intention of collaboration here that is fostered by the Eradicate Hate Summit. So that's the exchange pillar. And all of the most successful partnerships have come from the exchange and that dialogue. Enforcing, in my mind, is to continue to look at removal of this content as not just an action that you take once, but doubling down on, we're enforcing on the very ethos of the policies that we're really trying to get at. So to Yfat's point, the idea that you're trying to enforce on this ecosystem, you're trying to, with the full respect of human rights, making sure that you're removing all of this content and doubling down on, are we learning from this enforcement protocol? And then evolving is incredibly important. I mean, to the point that was made earlier, we also remove proactively 98+% of the content around dangerous orgs without a single person reporting it. But that's, in my mind, the beginning of what is an evolution, because we've got the enforcement at large scale, we've got the bespoke human investigative portion of things, and now I think we have the tools through AI, throughout the partnerships, to elevate our baseline and to make sure that we're sharing out that information. And I really do have to commend the GIFCT, because under, obviously, immense amounts of asks from all of us, and especially with our chairmanship, I've been working very closely with you, but I've seen the immense amount of effort that you all put into information sharing, and we've worked with you to make sure that, to the points that Tal and everybody here has made and Yfat has made, we don't just keep that information in-house. A rising tide lifts all boats, to steal one of our engineers' terms, and information sharing amongst all of the people here, especially within the tech platforms, is very important to that. So engage from a community perspective, enforce, and evolve would be the three pillars.
Brilliant, thank you, Dina. Val?
You know, as I listened to Tal-Or and to Dina, I was struck by the fact that this is a tech panel, but we were talking basically about human challenges, right? Like, she mentioned communication and trust and all of these elements, and for me, we believe very strongly in stakeholder engagement at TikTok. That's my whole function, that's what my team does. And for me, I think our most successful examples, like CyberWell and others, are when we've come to the conversation with an open mind. a dash of humility, acknowledging that we haven't achieved perfection, we don't know everything, we can benefit from this partnership, and bring that spirit to the conversation. I think a sense of curiosity and openness is critical. The second thing I think that's key is something that Tal-Or mentioned, which is transparency. As we build the relationship and the trust, there starts to be more data sharing, more exchange, and that leads to our being able to take data they give us and amplify that internally and get more out of it. The last thing that I just want to say real quickly is that I think for those NGOs in the room and platforms, frankly, it's good to think about there being a portfolio or a menu of options of how to collaborate. One option might be that you have a trusted flagger who does outstanding work. Another option might be that you have a partner who can give you really good policy advice as you're trying to write these rules. You asked about being a young platform. We had to write all our rules in the last few years, right? That's a lot. Laws have been around for hundreds of years. TikTok wrote them, recently. So, we need that input, and we've benefited from that. So I think looking, or maybe it's a campaign, but there's so many ways that collaboration what it can look like, and I think being open to that diversity is really important.
That's brilliant.
Hugh. One of the hazards of following these folks, this is nothing new to say. I do think in this sphere, success is not a finish line. It's constant improvement, and specifically in the AI universe right now. I mean, it's early days, and there is a lot of room for improvement. And so I don't think there's some specific metric or there's a threshold that would qualify as success. I think it's mostly about have we affirmatively and intentionally engaged? Have we looked for those external sources of information, inspiration, guidance that we need, that society needs more broadly, and have we then incorporated them into the systems in ways that makes them measurably better? And I think for us that's a priority, and to me that's not that's not like a finite process. It's continuous.
All wonderful points, but in the interest of saying something new, when you enter a library, you know to be quiet. When you go to a playground, you know to keep it child-friendly. When you go to a sports bar, you know that you're allowed to be a little bit more raucous. But when you look at online platforms, whether social media or games, 80 to 90% of the harmful content, including what appears to be genuine proliferation of hate, comes from people who don't actually understand what they're doing or that it's not acceptable within those platforms. So for me, success is us finding ways to communicate more clearly to people what those expectations are. And I think of all of this, whether it's policy or regulation or even content moderation that gives direct feedback in real time, it's all educating users about how they're being asked to behave, how they're being asked to participate, and hopefully helping them kind of chart that path to more effective pro-social behavior.
Thanks, Mike.
Interesting. So I have 12 months, 2 deliverables. One is...
I'm going to hold you to them.
Well, one is an open invitation to Microsoft or another relevant generative AI partner, could be Meta as well. One of the great things that I've seen CyberWell do as part of the partnerships that we have with the social media platforms that we're working with is highly annotated data sets of hate on a specific group. I think those are the type of data sets that we want to see kind of lay the groundwork for effective generative AI that's going to prevent the proliferation of hate, whether that's ingesting or output. And I actually call nonprofits to really kind of graduate into the digital era in the sense that the hatred that your communities are experiencing in the digital space need different strategies that are not limited to education, community liaising, and advocacy. And I think that data collection with the expressions of hate online is actually a great place to start. On Friday, we're going to be having a panel, I know it's Friday, but you should all come, calling access to data. And one of the things that nonprofits have said is a serious challenge for them is access to this data. But I want to tell you that everything that CyberWell has collected is open source, and it's been grasping at straws, but at the same time, you can make lemonade with only 2 lemons. So for people who are experiencing hate for their communities, the digital information out there is really going to bring us into addressing hate in the digital era.
I think that's fantastic. And you know, for my part at GIFCT, there are lots of different things that we could call out along the lines that the team have already laid out for you. One additional thing, which I think a lot of people touched on early in the panel, is there are a lot of platforms out there who aren't up on the stage with us, who aren't currently collaborating with us, and GIFCT are really trying to reach out to those platforms, trying to work with the diversity of platforms that are out there. So I would hope to be able to come next year and say, hey, that number of 26 platforms that I work with today is way, way up, right? We've got a lot more platforms that we're working with, and we're working with a more diverse set of platforms who do the full range of different things that you might be doing online, from gaming to banking to all manner of different things that happen online, and that violent extremists are trying to exploit every different aspect of the online ecosystem. With that, I'll just thank our remaining panelists, and again, thank Laura and all of you actually for being here today and supporting us. Thank you.